The smell of grease and coffee hung in the air, thick as a memory that never quite faded. It wrapped itself around the cafeteria like an invisible fog, clinging to the linoleum floors and stainless steel counters. Outside, the campus stirred, to life. Students rushing across the quad with backpacks swinging, professors clutching their notes and coffees, security guards finishing their night shifts. But inside the kitchen, time moved differently. It was quieter, lonelier. Miss Evelyn wiped down a table with practiced motions, her hands moving not out of thought but out of habit. 10 years of the same routine, and still, no one knew her name. She existed in the periphery, part of the furniture like the humming refrigerator or the flickering light bulb above the dish station. But in that invisibility lay something else, something no one could see. Evelyn's silence was not emptiness. It was survival. It was the steady rhythm of a life that had learned to carry grief without spilling. Beneath her apron, beneath the white hairnet that flattened her curls, lived a woman who had once stood, on stages chalk in hand, her mind sharp enough to cut through impossible problems. A woman whose words once made rooms of scholars lean forward in awe. They didn't know that when Evelyn looked at an equation, she didn't just read it, she heard it, like a musician hearing notes no one else could. And on this morning, as the cafeteria filled with clinking trays and the low murmur of conversation, Evelyn heard something that stopped her hand mid-wipe. A sentence tossed casually across the room that stirred something buried deep within her chest. It was the sound of an old language, one she hadn't spoken in decades. At the far corner, the mathematics department sat in their usual cluster, their voices carrying over plates of eggs and toast. "It doesn't make sense," a man muttered, his brow furrowed as he tapped his pen against a notebook. "The algorithm collapses at the third cycle even after compensation." Another voice, a woman's, sharp and confident, replied, "Did you factor in the entropic growth shift? I double-checked the data. The problem isn't technical, it's structural." The words slipped into Evelyn's ears like a forgotten melody. She slowed her movements, ears sharpening, heart beating faster. Pretending to tidy up some empty cups nearby, she caught a glimpse of the page on the table, dense with equations and scrawled notes. Her breath hitched. She knew that structure, that rhythm, that fragile scaffolding of logic barely holding itself together. Her lips moved before she could stop them, a whisper meant only for herself. If the matrix is degenerate, why not invert the vector in R4? The words floated just loud enough for one of them to catch. Professor Jonathan Harris, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, looked up sharply. "Excuse me, did you say something?" Evelyn froze. Her rag hung limp in her hand, her gaze fixed on the floor. Nothing. Just thinking out loud." "Interesting," Harris replied, an amused smirk tugging at his lips. "Seems we've got ourselves a linear algebra expert in the kitchen." A ripple of chuckles followed. Not cruel, not sharp, just the casual laughter of people who couldn't fathom her words being anything more than an accident. Evelyn forced a polite smile, dipped her head and walked away, heat rising in her chest. She returned to her counter, but her heart was no longer steady. Something had awakened. That night, in her small apartment on the edge of town, Evelyn sat, in silence. The pipes above her ceiling groaned with the weight of time. The flickering overhead light buzzed faintly. And in front of her sat a single object, a worn, spiral-bound notebook. The edges curled, the pages yellowed with age, and on the front a faded sticker still clung to the cover. MIT, Class of '84. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Formulas, sketches, diagrams, each line written in the sharp, confident strokes of someone who had once lived in a different world. She turned a page and the past flooded back. Crowded lecture halls, applause after her solutions, the hushed awe of professors when she proved something no one else could. But then the memory shifted, soured. A hospital room. The sound of a heart, monitor. Her mother in a wheelchair. Her once brilliant eyes fading into the blankness of Alzheimer's. Evelyn remembered scribbling equations on the back of medical charts just to keep herself from breaking down. She remembered leaving MIT without finishing her PhD, moving home to become a caretaker. And then, jobs, grocery stores, teaching, and finally the kitchen of the university she once dreamed of teaching at. She traced her finger over the last equation she had written all those years ago. Tears welled, but she blinked them back. This wasn't grief anymore. This was something else. A pulse. A calling. That whisper in the cafeteria wasn't a mistake. It was proof she still had it. Proof she could still see what they couldn't. She pulled a pen from the drawer, turned to a blank page, and began to write. Slowly, carefully at first, then faster, steadier, as though the years had never passed. Her hand moved with certainty, her mind sharpening with every line. And when she reached the end, she sat back, chest heaving, eyes glistening. There it is, she whispered into the quiet room. It was always there. The next morning, before the sun fully rose, Evelyn walked across campus. No apron, no cleaning supplies. Only her notebook clutched against her chest. The math building was silent, corridors bathed in the blue shadow of dawn. She slipped into room 2C, found the empty whiteboard, and uncapped a marker. 1 line. 2 lines. 3, 4, 5. Each stroke clean, confident, final. When she capped the marker and stepped back, she felt no triumph, no ego, only peace. 5 lines, a solution to a problem that had defeated the greatest minds in the country. She pressed the notebook against her heart and left as quietly as she came. Hours later, when Professor Harris entered the room with his morning coffee, he stopped dead in his tracks. The cup nearly slipped from his hand. On the board before him stood not a mess of attempts, but 5 pristine lines that shouldn't have existed. Elegant, impossible, perfect. His voice trembled as he whispered, "No way." He dropped his bag, ran to the board, eyes scanning each symbol. His hands shook, then he pulled out his phone, dialing furiously. Within minutes, Dr. Kim arrived. Then Morales. Then 2 graduate assistants. 6 people crowded into the room, staring in disbelief. "This isn't random," Morales muttered, her voice quivering. "This is genius." "But who?" Harris asked, breathless. "Who did this?" No one had an answer. Not yet, because in the hallway camera footage, time-stamped just after dawn, a small figure in a white uniform could be seen slipping inside room 2C. A notebook under her arm. Miss Evelyn. And, by the time the professors saw her face, the question had already begun spreading like wildfire across campus. Who is she? The whispers spread like fire in dry grass. At first, it was just a murmur among the math department, an unsolved equation that suddenly wasn't unsolved anymore. But by noon, the whispers had grown teeth. Phones buzzed, screens lit up, messages flew from inbox to inbox. By dinner, the entire campus knew. The Newton-Hayes equation, the one that had haunted scholars for years, had been cracked. Not by Princeton, not by MIT, not by Berkeley. By someone unknown. Someone who had left no name, no initials, only 5 lines on a whiteboard. Students crowded the hall outside room 2C, craning their necks to see the board before the janitors erased it. Someone snapped a photo and posted it online. Within an hour, the tweet had gone viral. The unsolvable equation solved. Replies flooded in. Was it a prank? AI generated? A genius student working in secret? Every theory was tossed into the storm, but one grain of truth had already been captured by the cold, watchful eyes of the security cameras. A woman in a white uniform. Small, quiet notebook pressed against her chest. Miss Evelyn. And just like that, the invisible woman who had served coffee and scrubbed trays for 10 years was no longer invisible. She was the mystery. She was the headline. She was the question that buzzed through lecture halls and dorm rooms and faculty meetings. Who is Miss Evelyn? By the time she stepped back into the cafeteria the next morning, something had shifted. The silence hit her first. Usually, the room brimmed with clatter and chatter, plates slamming, laughter echoing, professors debating. But as Evelyn walked, past the entrance, trays in her hands, the sound softened. Heads turned. Students watched her. Professors glanced at her over their newspapers. The hum of refrigerators seemed louder than the people. She carried the tray to the counter, set it down, and began refilling the coffee station. Her motions were steady, calm, as though she didn't notice the eyes that followed her. But inside, her heart raced. She could feel their stares like a heat against her skin. The quiet reverence was mixed with guilt, with awe, with confusion. It was a student who finally broke the silence. A young man, thin-framed, nervously clutching his phone. He stepped closer and cleared his throat. "Miss Evelyn?" She looked up, her brown eyes calm, tired, but kind. "Yes? Was it you?" he asked, voice low, as though the words themselves were dangerous. "Did you solve it?" The room held its breath. Evelyn didn't answer. She simply gave him the same polite smile she always did, wiped down the counter, and moved on. But silence is never enough to kill curiosity. That evening, the professors held a closed-door meeting. Harris, Morales, Kim, all gathered around the long oak table in the department office. On the table sat a laptop, open to the security footage. They had watched it 3 times already, but Morales insisted on one more. There she was, Evelyn, slipping into room 2C just after dawn, notebook clutched close. 23 minutes later, she walked out. Behind her, on the board, the solution. Morales leaned back, her arms crossed. "It's her, no doubt." Kim shook her head. "That's impossible. She works in the cafeteria. She's not faculty, not even a student. Doesn't change what's on that board," Harris replied. His voice was quiet, but there was awe in it. And something else too. Shame. "Whoever she is, she's smarter than all of us combined." They sat in silence. The weight of it pressed into the room. For years they had walked past her without a glance. And now, the woman they had ignored had left them something they couldn't explain. The next day, Morales approached Evelyn in the cafeteria. The attempt was casual, polite. "Miss Evelyn," she said softly, as though speaking to royalty, "we'd like to meet with you, privately, just to talk." Evelyn shook her head not unkindly. "I don't think that's necessary." Morales tried again. "It could mean something big, recognition, a paper you could—" "No," Evelyn interrupted, her tone firm but gentle. "No papers, no cameras, no stage." Her refusal only deepened the mystery. Why would someone capable of brilliance beyond comprehension want to remain unseen? Students whispered theories in the dorms. Professors argued in hushed tones. Was she a fallen prodigy? A recluse? An exile from the world? Of mathematics? One night, Harris stayed late in his office, digging through old academic archives. He typed her name slowly. Evelyn Booker. The results hit him like a brick. MIT, 1984. Graduated with highest honors. Published at 19. Prodigy. A photograph of her, younger, bright-eyed, holding an award in both hands. And then, nothing. After 1987, she vanished from the record completely. No papers, no conferences, no job history. It was as if she had been erased. The next morning, Harris carried the printed article into the department lounge. He set it on the table. Morales and Kim leaned over it, staring at the photo of a young Evelyn smiling from the past. "This is her," Harris said, his voice rough. "This is who's been pouring our coffee for 10 years. Kim touched the page lightly, her lips pressed thin. "She was a genius, and we never saw her." The room fell silent. Down in the cafeteria, Evelyn folded napkins and refilled sugar jars. Students slipped notes onto the counter. "Is it true? Teach us. We believe in you." She never answered them. She simply tucked the notes into her pocket and carried on. But when she returned to her apartment that evening, she laid them out across her kitchen table like tiny pieces of recognition, each one a spark. She stared at the notes, then at her old notebook. She had lived 2 lives. One celebrated, one invisible. And now the two were colliding in ways she could no longer ignore. That night, as the wind rattled her apartment windows, Evelyn whispered to herself, "You can't hide forever." But even she didn't know what that meant yet. Because while Evelyn wrestled with whether to step back into the light, the world beyond her walls was already preparing to drag her there. The story had broken beyond campus. News outlets had picked it up. Mystery mathematician solves impossible equation. A blurred screenshot of the hallway footage leaked online. A woman in a white apron, notebook in hand. Theories exploded. Talk shows debated. Forums lit up. And by the end of the week, the question wasn't just whispered in the cafeteria. It was being shouted across the country. Who is Evelyn Booker? The world does not wait when it smells a mystery. It devours it. By the end of that week, Evelyn's quiet life had been turned into a storm she could neither escape nor control. She heard it in the whispers that followed her down the campus, hallways, in the stares that lingered too long, in the silence that fell whenever she entered a room. For years, she had been invisible. Now she was a headline. Mystery mathematician solves impossible problem. Who is the cafeteria genius? Unsolved for a decade, answered in 5 lines. The cafeteria television, usually tuned to the news, flashed her blurred silhouette from the security camera footage. Students craned their necks to see her reactions, but Evelyn never looked. She kept her head down, moving through the noise like a ghost among the living. But at night in her apartment, the storm seeped through. She'd sit at her kitchen table, notebook open, the notes from students scattered like fallen leaves around her. She traced each word with her fingertip. Teach us. Don't hide. You matter. They pierced something inside her, something she thought had long since died. But with every note, with every whisper of respect, the old Evelyn stirred again. It was Morales who came to her first. 3 times she asked. 3 times Evelyn refused. But on the 4th, Evelyn agreed under one condition. No cameras, no press, no questions about the equation. Just listen. And so, one evening, Evelyn sat in the small office across from Professors Harris, Morales, and Kim. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the walls themselves held their breath. On the table lay Evelyn's old spiral notebook, closed, its cover worn smooth by years of touch. "You want to know who I am," she said, her voice steady. "So I'll tell you, but don't expect some grand tragedy. Sometimes pain doesn't scream. It just waits." The professors leaned closer, silent. "My name is Evelyn Louise Booker," she continued. "MIT, class of 1984. I graduated at the top of my class, published by 19, invited to conferences. They called me a prodigy." She paused, her eyes lowering. "That same year, my mother was diagnosed with advanced Alzheimer's." The words cut through the room like glass. Morales swallowed hard. "My father had already passed," Evelyn said softly. "There was no one else. I had a choice, formulas or family. And in my world, family wins." She closed her eyes briefly as if to steady herself. "I cared for her for 7 years. Watched her forget my name, my face. Watched her lose her words, her laughter. I stayed. I fed her, bathed her, sat by her bed while equations filled my notebooks. When she passed, I didn't go back. The academic world had moved on. My place was gone." For a long moment, no one spoke. Harris stared at the notebook on the table, shame etched into his features. Kim shifted in her chair, her lips pressed tightly together. Morales blinked quickly, fighting something in her chest. Finally, Evelyn lifted her head. Her voice was firm now, steady. "I didn't leave math. Math never left me. It lives here." She placed a hand over her heart. "But I walked away from the noise. I walked away for love." The silence that followed was not awkward. It was reverent. For the first time, they saw her not as a worker, not as a mystery, but as a woman who had chosen sacrifice over glory. A woman whose brilliance had not dimmed, only hidden. When she stood to leave, Morales whispered, Miss Evelyn, you deserve the world to know. But Evelyn shook her head gently. What I deserve is peace. She returned to her apartment that night feeling lighter, though she didn't know why. For years she had carried the weight of her past like an anchor. Speaking it aloud had not erased the pain, but it had loosened its grip. She sat at her table, the notes from students spread before her. She picked one up, written in shaky handwriting. I thought people like me couldn't belong here. But if you can, maybe I can too. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed the note to her chest and whispered, "You belong." The next morning, she walked into the cafeteria as she always did. But this time, something extraordinary happened. The room fell silent. Then slowly people stood, students, professors, staff, and then applause. Not polite, not forced. Real, raw, powerful. Evelyn froze in the doorway, her tray in hand, eyes wide. For 10 years, she had been invisible. Now, she was seen. A young black woman stepped forward, braids brushing her shoulders. She spoke softly, her voice trembling but clear. "Miss Evelyn, you don't have to serve us today. We want to serve you." The room erupted in cheers. Evelyn's lips trembled into a small, tearful smile. She set down the tray and wiped her eyes. That afternoon, the university president released a statement. A new fellowship would be established in her honor, the Evelyn Booker Scholarship for Hidden Excellence and more. Evelyn was invited to give a guest lecture. At first, she declined, twice. But on the third request, she said yes. When the day came, the auditorium was packed. Students filled every seat. Faculty lined the walls. Even janitors and cafeteria workers sat in velvet chairs for the first time. Evelyn walked onto the stage, not in robes or jewels, but in a simple navy dress, her old notebook pressed against her chest. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady, carrying. "My name is Evelyn Louise Booker. Many of you know me as the woman who serves coffee, who wipes tables, who goes unseen." She paused, letting the silence stretch. But brilliance doesn't wear a uniform. It doesn't come with a title. Sometimes it's the voice you never thought to ask. Her words settled over the room like a weight. She opened her notebook, flipped to the last page, and held it up. "These 5 lines you've seen, this isn't about math. This is about respect, about listening to the people you overlook, because knowledge without humility is just ego." The room erupted. Applause thundered. Some cried. Some bowed their heads. For the first time in decades, Evelyn stood not as a worker, not as a ghost, but as a teacher. But as she stepped off the stage, notebook pressed tight to her chest, a figure waited in the shadows of the backstage hall. A man in a dark suit, expression unreadable, eyes fixed on her. "Miss Booker," he said calmly, his voice like steel. "We need to talk." The applause was still echoing in her ears when the man stepped out of the shadows. His presence cut through the noise like a cold blade, steady, deliberate. The stage lights dimmed behind her, but his face was half lit by the glow of the exit sign. His suit was too sharp, his voice too even, his eyes too calm. In a day filled with reverence and joy, he felt like an intrusion, a reminder that peace is never free. "Miss Booker," he said again, softer this time, though no less commanding. "We need to talk." Evelyn froze, her notebook pressed tightly against her chest. For the first time that day, she felt small again, not invisible but cornered. She nodded faintly, allowing him to guide her down a narrow backstage corridor. The walls hummed with the muffled roar of applause, but back here it was silence and shadow. They entered a small office that smelled faintly of old paper and dust. He closed the door behind them with a quiet click, then leaned against the desk, arms crossed. His eyes studied her the way a scientist studies a specimen. "You solved the Newton-Hayes equation," he said flatly. "Correct?" Evelyn blinked, hesitant. "I wrote something on a board, that's all." He tilted his head, unimpressed. "Don't minimize it. That solution isn't just elegant, It's disruptive. Do you understand what you've done? Her lips parted, but no words came. She clutched the notebook closer. He leaned forward. That equation isn't just academic theory. It underpins algorithms used in cryptography, logistics, even predictive AI. Governments, corporations, they've poured billions into it. For years, no one could crack it. Now you have, which means every defense system, every encryption wall, every secure line of communication has just shifted. Evelyn's chest tightened. She thought of her equations as music, as beauty, not weapons, but now hearing him speak, she saw the shadow behind the lines she had written. I didn't solve it for them, she whispered. I solved it for me. He almost smiled, though it carried no warmth. Intent doesn't erase impact. The silence grew heavy. He finally stood straight, adjusting his tie. You'll be contacted by people who want to use what you've done. Some will offer you money. Others will offer you recognition. And some. He let the pause linger, sharp as a knife. Some won't ask at all. A chill rippled down her spine. Why are you telling me this? Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. Because, he said, stepping toward the door. You don't yet understand the power of being visible. You're no longer just Evelyn in the kitchen. You're Evelyn Booker, the woman who broke the unbreakable, and that makes you valuable. He opened the door, but before leaving, turned once more. His eyes softened just slightly, the steel giving way to something almost human. Be careful. The world notices brilliance only when it wants to own it. Then he was gone. Evelyn stood alone in the small office, her heart pounding, her notebook pressed so tight against her chest that her knuckles whitened. She had thought recognition would feel like light, like warmth. Instead, it carried shadow she didn't know existed. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her table, her apartment window cracked open to the city hum. The notebook lay. In front of her, pages open to the solution. She stared at it as if it were no longer hers, as if the 5 lines had grown teeth. Could it really be so dangerous? Had she been naive to think math existed outside of politics, power, control? Her mother's face came to her then, the way she had smiled, even in her fog. Evie, she had once whispered, you don't need the world to clap for you. Just stay true. But staying true felt impossible now. She was no longer invisible, and that meant choice was no longer hers alone. The following morning, Harris approached her with red-rimmed eyes and an urgency that unsettled her. Evelyn, he said, lowering his voice, the solution's already spreading. There are emails, requests from defense contractors, think tanks. They want to meet you. They're calling this revolutionary. I don't want meetings, Evelyn said firmly. He gave her a sorrowful look. That may not matter. She spent the day moving through the cafeteria like a ghost. Students tried to talk to her, slipping more notes onto her counter, asking for her guidance, her mentorship. She smiled at them, offered them kindness, but inside she trembled. Every eye that landed on her felt heavier now, not curiosity, not awe, but expectation. That evening she left campus quietly, her apron folded under her arm, her steps slow, deliberate. She thought she'd make it home unseen. But halfway down the dim street, a black car rolled to a stop beside her. The window slid down. A different man, this one younger, in a gray suit, leaned out. Miss Booker? His smile was practiced, corporate, dangerous in its smoothness. We'd love to have a word. She froze on the sidewalk, the city lights buzzing overhead, the night colder than it had been a moment ago. The night air was sharp, carrying the faint smell of gasoline and rain-soaked pavement. Evelyn stood frozen under the buzzing streetlight, her shadow stretching long across the sidewalk. The sleek black car idled beside her, headlights painting, the empty road in pale yellow. The man leaning out of the window smiled like someone used to getting what he wanted. Too smooth. Too calm. Miss Booker, he said again, his voice as polished as his suit. We'd love to have a word. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her body betrayed her, feet rooted, hands clenching the notebook against her chest. She managed to force a reply, her voice quiet, but steady. "And if I say no?" His smile never faltered. "Then we follow you home. And we talk there." The air thickened. Evelyn's pulse hammered in her ears. 10 years of being invisible, and now she was hunted, not for who she was, but for what she had written on a whiteboard. She glanced down the empty street, searching for escape. None. Just her, the car, and the weight of her decision. She swallowed, straightened her spine. "Fine. Say what you came to say." The back door swung open. Reluctantly, Evelyn slid into the leather seat. The car smelled of cologne and fresh polish, sterile in its perfection. 2 men sat inside, the one who had spoken, and another, silent, eyes fixed straight ahead. The door closed behind her with a final muffled thud, like a cell door locking. The younger man leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "We represent a private research consortium. Your solution has possibilities. We'd like to fund your work. 6 figures to start. A lab, assistance, freedom." Evelyn stared at him, unblinking. "Freedom doesn't come with strings." He chuckled softly. "Everything comes with strings, but ours are thin, almost invisible. We only ask that you direct your brilliance toward problems we assign." Her stomach nodded. "Weapons?" she asked flatly. "Defense," he corrected, smoothly. "National security. Think of it as protecting lives." Evelyn's jaw tightened. She thought of her mother, of the years lost to love and sacrifice, of the fragile peace she had built in the silence of obscurity. And now this. Men in suits, money, power. The exact world she had run from years ago. "I'm not interested," she said firmly. The car fell silent. The man's smile thinned. "You should be careful, Miss Booker. Equations don't belong to the people who write them. Once they exist, they belong to the world. You can either guide how they're used, or watch as others decide for you." Her throat tightened. "Is that a threat?" "Reality," he replied calmly. The car stopped at the corner near her apartment. The door clicked open. Evelyn stepped out into the cool night, her legs shaking, the notebook clutched tighter than ever. The car lingered, then rolled away, its taillights glowing red as blood. She stood there, trembling, until it disappeared. Only then did she let herself breathe. Inside her apartment, Evelyn collapsed into the chair by her kitchen table. The notebook lay in front of her, the 5 lines staring back like an accusation. She ran her fingers over the page, tears prickling her eyes. What had she done? She had written truth, beauty, but in their hands, truth became power, and power became danger. Her phone buzzed. A message, unknown number, 4 words. "We're not done yet." Her breath caught. She dropped the phone onto the table as though it had burned her fingers. She wanted to curl up, to vanish, to return to being invisible. But it was too late. The storm had found her. The next morning, the cafeteria buzzed louder than usual. Students whispered, professors clustered. A news van parked outside the gates. Evelyn walked in quietly, apron folded under her arm, but she felt the shift immediately. The way people leaned closer, the way conversations hushed when she passed. She was no longer just the cafeteria worker. She was the woman everyone wanted a piece of. At the counter, a freshman girl approached nervously, notebook in hand. "Miss Evelyn," she whispered, I wrote something. Could you look at it?" Evelyn opened the notebook slowly. Inside were scribbled equations, messy, raw, full of errors, but bursting with potential. She looked at the girl, saw herself at 19, burning with ideas, desperate to be seen. She smiled softly. This is beautiful. Keep writing. Don't stop, no matter what they say." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Evelyn's chest ached. For the first time in days, she felt something other than fear. She felt purpose. Maybe her place wasn't to hide, and maybe it wasn't to give herself to the men in suits. Maybe her place was here, reminding the overlooked that brilliance is theirs too. But even as she thought it, her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. Another message. You can't ignore us forever. Her hands trembled. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, forcing a smile for the students. But inside, she knew peace was slipping through her fingers. That evening, as she returned to her apartment, she noticed the lock on her door slightly ajar. Her breath caught. She pushed the door open slowly, every nerve screaming. Her small kitchen looked normal. The table, the chair, the flickering light. But her notebook, her old spiral notebook, was gone. The sight hit her like a fist to the chest. The table was bare. The spiral notebook that had carried her life, her equations, her memories, her identity, was gone. For a moment, Evelyn just stood there, her breath caught, her body rigid, her mind refusing to accept it. She blinked once, twice, praying she had misplaced it, praying it would reappear like a trick of the eye. But no. The wood of the table was naked, its absence screaming louder than any intruder could have. Her hands trembled as she touched the empty space where it had rested. That notebook wasn't just paper and ink, it was her past. Her mother's fading voice captured in equations scribbled beside hospital beds. Her brilliance preserved in proofs when the world had forgotten her. Her grief, her triumph, her love, all bound together in those curling, yellowed pages. Without it, she felt naked, exposed, violated. Her breath quickened. Whoever had taken it hadn't come for her money. There was none. They had come for the notebook, for the solution, for the pieces of her mind pressed onto those fragile sheets. She thought of the men in suits, their voices smooth but laced with steel. They had warned her. They had given her choices that weren't choices at all. And now they had taken the one thing she couldn't lose. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed into the chair. Her chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. No. No, no, no. She whispered, clutching her head. Tears slid down her cheeks unchecked. For the first time since she had returned to mathematics, she felt powerless. They hadn't just stolen her work. They had stolen her history, her proof that she had lived twice as daughter and as mathematician. She forced herself to breathe, forced her shaking hands to still. Panic wouldn't bring it back. Panic wouldn't protect her. She wiped her face and looked around the room. Nothing else was disturbed. Whoever had broken in had known exactly what to take. Her phone buzzed. A message. The same unknown number. This time, 7 words. You want it back? Then cooperate. Her body went cold. Her throat closed. She set the phone down slowly, staring at it as if it might grow fangs. The next morning she tried to carry on as usual. She put on her apron, tied her hair beneath the net, and walked into the cafeteria. But everything felt different. The clatter of trays, the chatter of students, the hum of refrigerators, all of it seemed muted, distant, unreal. She moved through it like a ghost. Students still approached her with notes, questions, admiration, but their words barely reached her. She smiled faintly, nodded politely, but inside she was consumed by the emptiness left on her kitchen table. Without her notebook, she felt like her soul had been amputated. Professor Harris noticed. He cornered her by the coffee station, his face lined with concern. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "are you all right?" She forced a small smile. "I'm fine." He frowned. "No, you're not. I can see it." "What happened?" Her resolve cracked. She lowered her eyes, voice barely a whisper. "They took it." Harris leaned closer. "Took what?" "My notebook." The words seemed to strike him physically. He straightened, eyes wide. "When?" "Last night." His jaw tightened. "Evelyn, you have to tell someone. Campus security. The police." "No," she cut in sharply. "No police. They won't understand. And they can't stop this. Harris looked at her, searching her eyes for answers, but she turned away, ending the conversation. She couldn't trust the system that had ignored her for decades. She couldn't trust men in uniforms or badges. The only person she could trust was herself. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her apartment staring at the phone. Her hands trembled as she typed a reply. "What do you want?" The response came instantly. "Meet tomorrow, 8 p.m., Warehouse 14. Come alone." Her heart pounded. It felt like a trap. Of course it was a trap, but what choice did she have? The notebook wasn't just her work, it was her life. Without it, she was adrift. The next day crawled by. She moved through the cafeteria in a haze, unable to eat, unable to rest. Every minute ticked closer to 8. By evening, she found herself walking the empty streets, the city around her blurred by fear and resolve. Warehouse 14 was on the outskirts of town, a hulking shell of rusted metal and broken windows. Its doors groaned as she pushed them open, her footsteps echoing across the vast empty floor. The air smelled of oil and damp wood. Shadows stretched long, swallowing her small frame. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. "I'm here." A figure stepped from the shadows. The younger man in the gray suit, his smile just as smooth, just as dangerous. In his hand, he held her notebook. "You came," he said simply. Her eyes locked on the notebook, her breath catching. "Give it back." "Of course," he said, holding it up. "But first, you'll work with us. One problem at a time. We'll give you the resources you deserve. Recognition, money, respect. All we ask in return is everything in here." He tapped the notebook lightly. Evelyn's chest burned with rage. "That's mine. My life. You can't just—" "You wrote it," he interrupted, his voice calm. "But now the world needs it, and we intend to use it." He extended the notebook, dangling it like bait. "All you have to do is say yes." Evelyn's hands trembled. Her mother's face flashed in her mind. The years of sacrifice, the silence, the invisibility. And now this, the demand to give herself away once more. Her lips parted to answer. And then, from the far side of the warehouse, another voice rang out, strong, fierce, familiar. "Step away from her." The words cracked through the cavernous warehouse like thunder. Step away from her. Evelyn's heart leapt into her throat. The gray-suited man froze, his smile faltering for the first time. His eyes flicked toward the shadows, narrowing. Evelyn turned, her pulse hammering, her breath sharp and shallow. From the far end of the warehouse, a figure emerged, footsteps echoing against the concrete. The dim light from a broken window caught his face, familiar, yet unexpected. Professor Jonathan Harris. His jaw was set, his eyes fierce in a way Evelyn had never seen. The tired, scholarly man she knew from the cafeteria was gone. In his place stood someone unshaken, defiant. "You don't belong here," Harris said evenly, his gaze locked on the man with the notebook. "And she doesn't belong to you." The man in gray tilted his head, recovering his composure with a smirk. "Professor Harris, isn't it? How quaint. You think you can walk into this conversation and change the outcome?" "I don't think," Harris replied, stepping closer, his voice firm. "I know." The two men faced each other like predators circling, the tension stretching taut between them. Evelyn stood in the middle, her chest rising and falling with panic, her eyes darting between them. "Evelyn," Harris said, his voice gentler now, though still edged with urgency. "Come with me. You don't owe them anything. You don't owe anyone anything." The man in gray chuckled, shaking his head. "On the contrary, she owes the world. Brilliance like hers doesn't get to hide. It doesn't get to say no. We can offer her more than you ever could. Power, influence, resources. We can make her immortal." Evelyn's stomach twisted. Immortal. The word felt like poison. She thought of her mother, forgotten by the world, despite her love, her sacrifice. Immortality wasn't in fame or equations, it was in memory, in care. Harris stepped closer. She's not yours to make into a tool. The man in gray's smile thinned, his patience fraying. Then she'll decide right now. Evelyn, choose, him or us, peace or power, the notebook or silence. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The weight of two worlds pressed on her chest. One offered her recognition and danger. The other offered her protection, but no promises. She looked at the notebook, dangling from the man's hand like bait. She could feel her mother's voice. In her ear, faint but steady. Stay true. Her lips trembled. Before she could finish, headlights sliced across the broken windows, flooding the warehouse with harsh beams. Engines roared outside. More cars. More men. The gray-suited man's smirk returned, colder than before. Looks like you don't have much time to think after all. Doors slammed. Heavy footsteps thundered toward the warehouse. Harris moved, instinctively stepping in front of Evelyn, shielding her with his body. His voice dropped low, urgent. Run when I say. Evelyn's heart pounded in her ears. She clutched the edges of her coat, her entire body trembling. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't a hero. She was a mathematician, a daughter, a woman who had already given too much. But the world wouldn't let her fade back into silence. Not now. The warehouse doors burst open. Shadows spilled in. 4, 5, 6 men in suits, their movements sharp, efficient, dangerous. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to take. The gray-suited man held the notebook higher, his smile like a blade. Gentlemen, our guest has agreed to join us. Evelyn's breath caught. I didn't. Harris's voice cut through the chaos. Now, Evelyn. He shoved her toward the side exit, his body bracing against the men advancing from the front. Evelyn stumbled, her feet pounding against the cold concrete, her lungs burning. She darted into the shadows, her eyes fixed on the sliver of moonlight seeping through a side door. But before she could reach it, one of the men broke away from the group, moving with predatory speed. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm, yanking her back. Evelyn screamed, the sound raw, primal. She twisted, kicked, but his grip was iron. Not so fast, he growled. Harris roared, charging at the man with a fury Evelyn never thought him capable of. His shoulder slammed into the man's chest, knocking him back. The notebook slipped from the gray-suited man's hand, skidding across the floor. Time slowed. Evelyn's eyes locked on it, her life, her past, her proof. She lunged forward, fingers stretching, nails scraping the cover. She grabbed it, clutching it to her chest with desperate strength. But when she lifted her head, she saw something that froze her blood. Harris was on the ground, 3 men closing in around him, fists raised. His glasses shattered, blood streaking his cheek. He looked at her through the blur, his voice hoarse but firm. Go! Her entire body shook. Her hand tightened on the notebook. Her legs refused to move. And in that suspended moment, Evelyn realized the truth. Saving the notebook meant nothing if she lost him. She had a choice. Run with her past, or stay and fight for the man who had just risked everything to protect her. Her chest heaved, tears blurring her vision. She whispered, Mama, tell me what to do, and then she turned. The notebook throbbed in her hands like a living thing, its weight suddenly unbearable. For decades it had been her anchor, her tether to the life she thought she had lost. But now, as Harris bled beneath fists and shadows, the notebook no longer felt like salvation. It felt like a chain. Her mother's voice whispered faintly in her memory. Formulas or family. She had chosen family once, long ago. Was she about to choose it again? Evelyn's legs trembled. She could hear Harris groan, could see the blur of fists raining down. Her heart split in two, one half clinging to the pages that carried her brilliance, the other straining toward the man who had stepped into the fire for her without hesitation. Her throat closed around a sob. The men weren't after Harris. They were after her, after the book. She could run, she could escape, no one would blame her. But if she ran now, his blood would stain her freedom forever. With a cry that ripped from the deepest part of her chest, Evelyn hurled the notebook across the warehouse floor. The sound of it skidding echoed like a gunshot. The men froze, their heads snapping toward it. "Leave him," she shouted, her voice sharp, commanding. "You want me, then take me." The words shocked even her. They carried more steel than she knew she possessed. The gray-suited man's eyes flickered with satisfaction. He motioned with his hand, and two of the men released Harris, moving toward her instead. Harris collapsed onto the ground, coughing, blood pooling at the corner of his mouth. Evelyn rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. "Jonathan," she whispered, pressing a trembling hand against his face. "Stay with me." He gripped her wrist weakly, his eyes burning despite the pain. "You shouldn't have stayed." "I couldn't run," she whispered fiercely. "Not again." The footsteps grew louder. The men loomed over them, shadows stretching long across the cold floor. One reached down and grabbed Evelyn by the arm, wrenching her to her feet. She gasped, struggling against his grip, but he was immovable. Harris tried to rise, but the other man slammed him back down with a boot to his shoulder. The gray-suited man retrieved the notebook from the floor, brushing dust from its cover with almost reverent care. He held it up for Evelyn to see, his smile sharp. "See? You give yourself, or we take it all. Either way, the world gets what it needs." "Needs?" Evelyn spat, her voice breaking with fury. "The world doesn't need my equations to build walls and weapons. The world needs to remember the people it steps over every day." His expression hardened, the mask slipping. "You don't get to decide that anymore." For the first time, Evelyn felt something inside her snap. For years, she had been silent. For years, she had bent herself into invisibility, bowed under grief, swallowed pride. But not tonight. Not here. Her voice rose, shaking the rafters of the warehouse. "Then you don't deserve it?" The man froze, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "You don't deserve my work," she said, louder now, each word like a hammer against the concrete walls. "You don't deserve my life. I carried my mother through death, I carried myself through silence, and I carried mathematics even when it carried me nowhere. And you think you can walk in here and claim it like a prize?" She spat at his feet. "You'll never own me." The men tightened their grip on her arms, but Evelyn didn't flinch. Harris, still on the ground, lifted his head and managed a broken laugh through blood. "That's the Evelyn Booker I read about." The gray-suited man's face twisted into a snarl. He raised the notebook high as if to strike her with it. "Then you'll watch it burn." The words sliced through her. Her body lunged instinctively, but the men held her back. She screamed, raw and desperate, as he pulled a lighter from his pocket and flicked it alive. The tiny flame danced, hungry, cruel. "No," she cried. "Please." But he didn't stop. He held the flame to the fragile corner of the notebook. The paper blackened, curled, the faintest wisp of smoke rising. Evelyn's knees buckled, her body convulsing with grief. Years, decades, memories, all about to vanish in a cruel hiss of fire. Then, chaos. The warehouse doors blasted open, shouts filled the air, blinding light from flashlights flooded the space. Campus security? No. Police armed and shouting. "Drop it. Hands where we can see them." The men in suits stiffened, their control shattered. The gray-suited man snarled, snapping the lighter shut, the notebook still intact in his hand. Evelyn gasped in relief, tears streaking down her cheeks. One of the officers shouted again, "Release her, now!" The grip on her arms loosened slightly, confusion rippling through the room. Harris, seizing the moment, used the last of his strength to lunge forward, tackling one of the men at Evelyn's side. The others turned, fists raised. The scene dissolved into chaos. Shouts, fists, boots pounding against concrete. The notebook slipped again, sliding across the floor into the shadows. Evelyn's eyes locked on it. Her chest heaved. Around her the world clashed. Sirens, fists, guns. But all she saw was the notebook lying just out of reach. Her hand stretched. Her fingers brushed the cover. She almost had it. And then, a gunshot split the air. The gunshot shattered the warehouse like glass. The echo ricocheted through steel beams, through the pounding of boots, through Evelyn's heart. For a moment, everything froze. Even the air seemed to hold still, waiting to know whose blood had been claimed. Evelyn's hands shook violently as she pulled the notebook into her chest, clutching it like a shield. Her eyes darted around the chaos, police shouting, men in suits scattering, Harris sprawled on the floor, gasping. But the smoke from the barrel hung heavy, suspended, refusing to reveal its truth. Then she saw him. One of the suited men collapsed to the ground, clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. The gun wasn't in a police officer's, and it was Harris's. Her heart twisted. He had taken the weapon from the man he tackled and fired in desperation. His glasses were gone, his lips split, his body trembling, but his eyes were sharp. "Run, Evelyn!" he roared, voice breaking. Her legs refused. She couldn't leave him, not after everything. But the warehouse was collapsing into bedlam. The men in suits weren't ordinary thugs. They moved with precision, with training. Whoever they weren't giving up easily. Police tackled two of them, but the gray-suited man slipped through the chaos like smoke, his smile still intact, the lighter still in his hand. His eyes met Evelyn's across the floor, unflinching, unbroken. He mouthed a single word. "Soon." Then he vanished into the shadows. Evelyn's chest heaved. The notebook pressed against her heart, but for the first time it felt less like salvation and more like a curse. The warehouse echoed with shouts and commands, the air thick with smoke and adrenaline. Officers rushed to restrain the remaining men. But Evelyn only saw Harris, slumped, bleeding, struggling to stay conscious. She dropped to her knees beside him. "Jonathan, please, stay awake." He coughed, blood staining his teeth, his hand gripping hers with surprising strength. "Don't let them take you." Tears blurred her vision. "I'm not leaving you." "You have to," he whispered. "The notebook, it's not just yours anymore, it's theirs. If you're not careful, you have to decide who gets it. Don't let them decide for you." His words struck her harder than any fist could. She realized with a sickening weight that this wasn't about equations anymore. It wasn't about recognition or humiliation or even revenge. This was about ownership. Ownership of her story, her brilliance, her sacrifice. If she gave in, the world would twist her work into something she couldn't bear to recognize. She squeezed his hand. "I won't. I swear it." Paramedics rushed in, lifting Harris onto a stretcher. He groaned, but didn't fight. Evelyn followed close, clutching the notebook, her chest tight. The flashing red and blue lights outside painted the night in frantic colors. Reporters had gathered beyond the barricades, cameras flashing like hungry predators. "Miss Booker," one shouted. "Did you really solve it?" "Who are those men?" another cried. "Why are they after you? Are you going to sell your solution?" The questions battered her like hailstones. Evelyn kept her head down, shielding Harris with her body as paramedics loaded him into the ambulance. Her hands trembled as she climbed in after him, her notebook still pressed tight against her chest. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Inside, the world shrank to the steady beeping of machines and the labored rise and fall of Harris's chest. Evelyn's tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She brushed his bloodied hair back gently. "You stayed for me," she whispered. "Now I'll stay for you." The hospital swallowed them next. White walls, antiseptic air, harsh fluorescent lights. Doctors swarmed Harris, wheeling him into surgery. Evelyn stood frozen in the hallway, her notebook still in her arms, her reflection fractured in the glass doors. Hours passed. She sat in a plastic chair, staring at the notebook in her lap. Every time she thought about opening it, her chest tightened. It wasn't just her past anymore, it was the world's future. It terrified her. Footsteps broke her trance. Dr. Morales approached, her face pale, her eyes rimmed red. She sat beside Evelyn without a word, her hands folded tightly in her lap. For a long moment the silence stretched between them. Then Morales spoke, her voice low. "I saw the news. They're calling you the woman who holds the key. Do you understand what that means?" Evelyn's lips trembled. "It means I'm not safe." Morales nodded slowly. "Not safe, and not invisible anymore. You need protection. You need allies. You need people who won't let them take this from you." Evelyn turned to her, searching her face. "And what if I don't want to be anyone's genius? What if I just want to go back to wiping tables?" Morales' eyes softened, glistening. "You can't. Not anymore. You wrote yourself back into the world. And now, the world is watching." Evelyn's throat tightened. The weight of those words crushed her. She thought of her mother again, her soft hands, her fading smile, her whisper. Stay true. How could she stay true when the world wanted to twist her into something she wasn't? The doors to the operating room swung open. A surgeon stepped out, pulling off his gloves. His face was grave. Evelyn shot to her feet, notebook clutched so tightly her knuckles turned white. "How is he?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The surgeon met her eyes. His words were steady, but they cut her open all the same. "He may not make it through the night." The surgeon's words clung to her like frost. "He may not make it through the night." Evelyn stood frozen in the hospital hallway, her notebook pressed against her chest, her pulse pounding in her ears. Around her, the world moved on. Nurses hurried past, monitors beeped, stretchers rolled through automatic doors. But Evelyn stood still, her grief threatening to swallow her whole. She had already lost one parent to silence, to the slow theft of Alzheimer's. Now she was about to lose the only person who had dared to see her in decades. Her knees buckled. She sank into the hard plastic chair, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. She thought of Harris's last words before surgery. "Don't let them decide for you." His blood was still on her hands, drying, stiffening, reminding her of what her brilliance had cost. She whispered into the sterile air, her voice cracking. "Mama, what do I do now?" But no voice came back, no answer. Just the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the pounding of her own heart. Hours bled into one another. Morales stayed with her, offering quiet strength, though Evelyn barely heard her words. Reporters swarmed outside the hospital, demanding interviews, statements, answers. Offers poured in from corporations, governments, media outlets. All of them wanted the same thing. Her mind. Her work. Her soul. At 3 a.m., a nurse emerged. Harris had survived the surgery, but he was fragile, uncertain. Evelyn exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She was allowed to see him briefly. Inside the dim hospital room, Harris looked pale, wires trailing from his chest, oxygen hissing softly. But his eyes opened when she touched his hand. "You stayed," he whispered weakly. "Of course I stayed," she said, tears spilling. He managed a faint smile. "Then don't stop now. Fight for it, Evelyn. Not for them. Not for me. For you." Her chest broke open. She kissed his knuckles and promised herself that this time she would not run. The following week, the university called a press conference. Cameras lined the hall, reporters buzzing like hornets. Evelyn stood at the podium, her notebook in her hands, her heart steady despite the storm. Students filled the seats. Staff stood in the aisles. Even cafeteria workers leaned against the walls, arms folded with quiet pride. She looked out at the sea of faces, some adoring, some expectant, some skeptical, and began to speak. "My name is Evelyn Louise Booker," she said, her voice steady, clear. "Some of you know me as the woman who wiped your tables, who poured your coffee, who went unseen. Some of you now know me as the woman who solved an equation no one else could. But I am neither of those things alone. I am both. I am all." The room held its breath. I did not choose to be seen again. But now that I am, I will decide what you see and what you don't. You want my notebook. You want the 5 lines. You want the mind you ignored until it was convenient. But my work is not yours to twist. It is not a tool for weapons or money or power. She opened the notebook slowly, her fingers brushing the fragile paper. She turned to the last page, the page with the solution. The audience leaned forward, cameras flashing, reporters whispering. Evelyn raised the notebook high. Her voice rang, out strong, unshaken. This belongs to no one but the truth itself. And then, before anyone could stop her, she tore the page free. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She held the single sheet of paper for all to see, the 5 lines that had changed everything. Then, with steady hands, she lit a match. The flame devoured the page, curling it into ash. Gasps turned into shouts. Reporters surged forward. Cameras clicked furiously. Evelyn stood tall, watching the ashes drift down like dark snow. "The world doesn't need my solution," she said, her voice unwavering. "The world needs to learn how to listen, to see the people it ignores, to respect brilliance no matter where it hides. You looked past me for 10 years, and in doing so, you looked past thousands more. That's the equation you should solve." Silence fell, thick and heavy. Then, applause. First from the students, then from the staff, then from the entire hall. A roar of approval, not for the solution, but for the woman who had refused to let the world own her. Later, in the quiet of the cafeteria, Evelyn sat at a table surrounded by students. They leaned forward eagerly, notebooks open, eyes bright. She wasn't giving them formulas, she was giving them something deeper. How to see, how to listen, how to believe in themselves even when no one else did. A freshman girl with curls and glasses raised her hand shyly. "Miss Evelyn, if you burned the solution, what happens now?" Evelyn smiled softly, the lines on her face warm with wisdom. "Now," she said, "we begin again. Together. Page 1. The students leaned closer, scribbling in their notebooks. Evelyn looked at them and felt her heart swell. For the first time in decades, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't a ghost. She was a teacher again. Outside, the world still roared. Governments speculated. Corporations schemed. The gray-suited man surely still plotted in some shadow. But Evelyn no longer feared them, because her brilliance was not 5 lines on a page. It was here, alive, shared, unbreakable. She closed her eyes, her mother's voice drifting back at last, soft and proud. "Stay true." And for the first time in years, Evelyn knew she had.